Police have officially designated the disappearance of 4-year-old GUS LAMONT from South Australia's Yunta region as a major crime. This is after confirming that they do have a suspect who resided at the same Oak Park station where GUS was last seen last September.
Well, more now on the twist in the disappearance of 4-year-old GUS LAMONT. South Australian police have declared the case a major crime and have revealed a family member is now a suspect.
Absolutely devastated. That's how GUS LAMONT's grandparents have responded to revelations someone in the family is considered a suspect in his disappearance. It's the first time we've heard from them in the 4 months since the 4-year-old's disappearance, and comes as each hire lawyers.
Offering information, and they made clear in that press conference that not all of that information appeared to line up. There were a number of inconsistencies as they described them. So they will continue to speak to them and other members of the family to really try and bulk out that picture. But they will keep pressure up. They do believe they have a suspect in mind. So they will keep working towards charging that individual. But we're a very long way from anyone being found guilty at this stage.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I swear.
Speaking with police at a time when it was still thought 4-year-old GUS LAMONT had simply wandered off, his grandparent Josie Murray on Oak Park Station. Now speaking out, reacting to the news, the police investigation has taken a turn and a family member is now considered a suspect in his disappearance.
Now, the vast majority of you, over 60%, believe whatever happened to GUS was intentional. In other words, if GUS is no longer alive, then he was intentionally killed. I have to say, I don't believe that. I can't say why. It's not really based on any facts or evidence. I'm really just going on intuition. I think if there were signs of a family member being rough or inappropriate with a child, that would have reached us through the grapevine by now. Not necessarily, but conceivably. I think this scenario seems more likely because it's also one of the scenarios people speculate could have happened in the Ramsey and McCann cases, an unintentional or accidental death followed by a deliberate cover-up. You must remember, in a situation where a child dies in a family, if it's intentional, if it's malicious, if it's really evil in that sense, you have to ask yourself why other members of the family would support that. Why would they support a family member murdering another family member? I mean, would you? Of course, if it's something that happened that wasn't intentional, then it's easier to imagine a family member going along with it. Now, I know the obvious question to ask is, well, if you have an accidental death, why on earth do you need to cover it up in the first place? Why on earth do you need to hide something if you didn't really do anything wrong? And it's a good question. It's a valid question. But there are also good answers for it. And it's one that we need to think about in this case as well. In this analysis, I want to deal with 2 possible scenarios, actually a third as well, but in more detail, 2 possible scenarios for an accidental death, one that we've already dealt with in some detail, but another that we haven't. And that other one is the number 7 clue we've all missed. We also want to then hold that hypothesis in one hand and ask, okay, so if this happened and if it was accidental, then why not just call it in if it wasn't anyone's fault? How would that make sense? Why the cloak and dagger? Why would there be a need to cover it up if it was an accident? And obviously all of this that we're doing is speculation. We're playing with ideas. We're not trying to implicate or blame anyone. What we're simply trying to do is consider possibilities for what could have happened to GUS and what direction the police need to take in searching for him, because obviously these scenarios will inform where and how you search. And these are also possibilities that I think investigators might be considering as well. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. Right, so let's start with scenario 1, a fall in the pit. This would have happened hypothetically close to the homestead. Now, the first scenario is based on the narrative we've been told. that Gus was playing on a mound of sand outside, unsupervised, when he disappeared. Now, if that part is true, that he was playing on a mound of sand, then it's entirely feasible that he fell from that mound into a pit that was excavated to create that mound. And there are mounds all over the property. But if that is the case, how could anyone be liable for that? Well, certain parts of the property were essentially, think about it, the same as a construction site. And so whoever was in charge of that construction would be in charge of keeping it safe, cordoning off holes and hazards, and also providing either signs or the requisite materials required to protect people from hazards. So if I was a member of the investigative team, I would go to the homestead and ask about the construction going on. What is it in aid of? As far as I can see, it seems to be a bungalow or an extension to the original homestead is being done. Who is that for, and who is paying for it, and when did that come about? Who's in charge of that whole operation? Now, it's very clear that none of that was in place. I'm talking about cordoning off of hazards, closing them off, making them safe for passers-by, basically. And so if Gus fell into a hole and died, in terms of the construction, that these holes were part of, related to that construction, if that was the case, well then who would be responsible? Would it be the person responsible for the project? Would it be the construction manager? Would it possibly be the owner of the property, that could possibly be liable? Could someone conceivably be liable in this situation? Now, the problem I have with this theory is it would have to be a pretty long drop to kill a child. And I'm not sure any of the holes were really deep enough for a fall to be lethal. Possible. The question is probable. But you can see if there was a fall, there wouldn't be any intentionality surrounding it. It would be an accident. But I'm not sure if it would be without legal consequences. And that brings us to scenario 2, speed limit. Scenario 2 is based even less on the narrative we were given than scenario 1. It imagines 2 members of the family were away from the homestead. That was what we were told. And how were they away? In a vehicle, perhaps a vehicle and a motorbike. And it was growing late in the day and visibility was poor. That's again taking our lead from them at what time that this took place. And so the dust in those conditions, think about it, the growing gloom of dusk, it's getting dark. Visibility in this particular scenario is worsening. Now, the size of the property and the terrain would probably invite drivers to drive faster than they would normally drive. Think about it, the smaller property, the less you need to speed to get from A to B. But the larger property, the more time it's going to take you to get somewhere, and perhaps that might lead to impatience, especially at the end of a long day. Just getting the appropriate speed might mean it takes so much longer to get from A to B, and so wouldn't that tempt you to drive a little faster? Now, it's possible in this scenario that Gus actually even went with to attend the sheep, and that's where he got lost, got separated perhaps from the people he was with. Perhaps they didn't know that he got out the car or something, or got off the motorbike, whatever the case was. Possibly someone lost sight of him and he was run over by a vehicle in the dark. Again, this is an accidental scenario, but where there might be legal consequences. Now, I have a problem with this scenario. I'll get to it in a moment. But you may have noticed signs on the property showing what the speed limit there is. Now, think about the presence of those signs. What is the purpose of those signs? Well, it is to keep people safe. There's a recommended speed limit, and someone exceeding that speed limit late in the day or even just after dark, perhaps rushing to get home, could that have led to some kind of accident? Now, I want you to take that scenario and flesh it out a little bit. What if someone is driving? Perhaps they're returning to the homestead, they're hungry, it's been a long day out, perhaps additional sheep had to be tended to, and this was just made the whole thing so much more exhausting and time-consuming, and a vehicle returns to the homestead in a rush, returning for dinner's getting cold, and so they're returning at speed, and Gus, who's been at the homestead all along, suddenly appears unexpectedly in the headlights. The real problem I feel with this scenario is, and that's just a personal feeling, I can't imagine Jess, Gus's mother, knowing about what happened all along. I kind of get the feeling somehow or other she's been kept in the dark about this. So perhaps Jess, even in this scenario, was elsewhere. Perhaps she was riding a motorbike. It's difficult to say, but this is another potential scenario that could easily be lethal without being intentional, and could also have possible legal consequences, perhaps even serious legal consequences. These could be even worse if the person driving was driving under the influence. And why not? It was a Saturday night on a remote farm. A third scenario that would not be anyone's fault, but it would also not really make sense, not contacting the authorities, would be if Gus was bitten by a snake. There would be no reason to cover that up. There would be no reason not to summon medical assistance. And I doubt there would be any legal consequences for something that was essentially an act of God. What do you think? Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that, but do let me know in the comments, can you think of any other scenarios that aren't intentional but could involve a possible legal sanction? Do let me know in the comments. Well, that's it from me. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you guys next time.